Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to try this again. For some reason, YouTube just dropped it when I was trying to do it, so I'm going to record it on the iPad and then move it up to YouTube. Okay. Today we're going to talk about, we had an issue on Facebook today about the separation of church and state, and how misunderstood that separation is. Okay. This is Evangelist Terry Carter here in Indiana. So we're going to discuss separation of church and state, and Bible reading, and prayer in schools, and how it should be done, and the national motto, "In God We Trust." What's with that? These days is becoming offensive to so many people. Hang on a minute here. Okay, I was taking my inhaler. My voice was getting scratchy earlier. Okay, now, as we know in our Bill of Rights, it tells us, by my first page here, okay. We're going to talk about the First Amendment and the Article 6 of the United States Constitution. The First Amendment to the Constitution says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This is in two parts, known as the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. And I don't know why they're calling this doctrine, because it's not. The three central contracts were derived from the First Amendment, which became Americans' doctrines for church-state separation. No coercion in religious matters, no expectation of support to support a religion against one's will, with religious liberty and encompasses all religions. In some citizens are free to embrace or reject a faith, and support for religion, financial or physical, must be voluntarily, and all religions are equal in the eyes of the law with no special preference or favoritism. Okay. Now, the reason that these things was established in the Constitution was, first of all, as we know, if you know your American colonial history and the founding of this country, is that in England, the Church of England was the main church, and you had to attend that church. And if you wasn't attending that church, you was prosecuted for it. And so the Pilgrims and the Puritans and all those other, the Congregationalists and all them other ones fled to America to avoid this religious prosecution. Okay. So our founders came to this country to have freedom of worship. Okay. So basically, we can say that America's foundation is based upon Christianity and the Bible. Historically, okay? It cannot be denied any other way because of the circumstances. I mean, there's people that disagree with that, but history tells it for what it is. Okay. Now, what I'm about to read to you is from Thomas Jefferson. And I'll quote, and he's saying, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence the act of the whole American people who declared that their legislator should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of these sentiments which need to restore to man all his natural rights. Convinced that he has no natural right in opposition to his social duties." Then Jefferson echoes the language of the founder, Roger Williams, who was also a minister, by the way. He wrote in 1644, "When they, the church, have opened a gap in the hedge, or the wall of separation, between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world," yes, the Bible does tell us that we should be separate from the world. That's my addition there. So God has ever broke down the wall itself, removed the candlestick, and made his garden a wilderness as it is this day. That is referring to when Adam and Eve was cast out of the garden. Okay. That therefore, if he will ever please to restore his garden and paradise again, it must be of necessity he be walled, and particularly into himself, from the world, and that all that be saved out of the world are to be transplanted out of the wilderness of the world. Okay? What the Bible teaches has always taught in Christianity that the church is to be separate from the world. Okay? And that's a major problem today. Okay? Because so many churches are becoming apostate. I'm not just saying from Baptist doctrine. I'm Baptist, I believe. But in the foundations of other congregations and faiths have corroded very bad. Okay? To the point that many of the churches today are apostate. Which I'm not getting into that on another message. I don't want to go chasing rabbits. Okay. Now, there was an issue during the French and Indian War, requiring them to share the pretensions of the Pope, which may or may not have been applied during the Revolution. Okay. There were Catholic colonies. Um, and we're talking about Massachusetts and Connecticut. There was in the states of the young states of Massachusetts and Connecticut, there was issues of violation of the church and state. Okay. Jefferson and Madison's approach was not only taken in the 18th century. Jefferson's state of religious freedom was drafted in opposition to a bill chiefly supported by Patrick Henry, which would permit any Virginian to belong to any denomination. In other words, they were trying to control what denomination you could belong to if you were a Virginian, right? And this happened during or around the French and Indian War, okay? But which would require him to belong to some denomination and pay taxes to support it. In other words, tax base was supporting the churches in Massachusetts and Connecticut. Otherwise, they're talking about more than just tithes and offerings, okay? The churches were supported by taxes, okay? Similarly, the Constitution of Massachusetts originally provided that no subject shall be hurt, molested, or restrained in his person, liberty, or estate for worshiping God in the manner or season most agreeable to the dictates of his own conscience, provided he does not disturb the public peace or obstruct others in their religious worship. And then in Article 2 of that same Constitution, the people of this Commonwealth have the right to invest the legislator with power to authorize and require, and the legislature shall from time to time authorize and require the several towns, parishes, precincts, and other bodies, politic or religious societies, to make suitable provision at their own expense for the institution of the public worship of God. In other words, tax money should not be used to support the church. That's what he's saying here, okay, all right? And for the support and maintenance of public Protestant teachers of piety, religion, and morality, in which all cases where such provision should not be made or shall not be made voluntarily. The people of this Commonwealth, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, also have the right to and do invest their legislature with authority to enjoin upon all the subjects and attendance upon the instructions of the public teachers aforesaid, at stated times and seasons, if there be any on whose instructions they can conscientiously and conveniently attend. Article 3. Since in practice this meant that the decision of who was taxable for a particular religion rested in the hands of the select men, usually Congregationalists. This system was open to abuse. It was abolished in 1833. The intervening period is historically known or sometimes referred to as an establishment of religion in Massachusetts, okay? And now, then we're getting into New York and New Jersey. The Duke of York had required that every community in new hands of the New York and New Jersey support some church. Huh? But this was more often Dutch Reformed, Quaker, or Presbyterian than Anglican. Some chose to support more than one church. He also ordained that taxpayers were free, having paid his local tax, to choose their own church. In terms of the surrender of New Amsterdam, that was a Dutch settlement, had provided the Dutch which had liberty of conscience, and the Duke, an openly divine right Catholic, was no friend of the Anglican Church. Tough word. Okay, the first Anglican minister in New Jersey arrived in 1698. To the Anglicanism was more popular in the state of New York. Connecticut had a real establishment of religion. Its citizens did not adopt the Constitution at the Revolution, but rather amended their charter to remove all references to the British government. As a result, the Congregational Church continued to be established, and Yale College at that time was a congregational institution. Yale was one of the very first colleges in the American colonies, okay? We won't get into colleges here shortly. They received grants from the state until Connecticut adopted a constitution in 1880, partly because of this issue. As was this Christian university or college was receiving funding from the state. Okay. For example, the New Jersey Constitution of 1776 provides liberty. Let me jump back up one. The absence of an establishment of religion did not necessarily imply that all men were free to hold office. Most colonies had a test act. We're going to hear about the test of religions here later in this video, okay? Several states retained them for a short time. This stood in contrast to the federal constitution, which explicitly prohibits the employment of any religious test for federal office, and for which through the 14th Amendment later exceeded this prohibition to the states. For example, the New Jersey Constitution of 1776 provides the liberty of conscience to such the same language as Massachusetts, which was similarly forbidding the payment of taxes, tithes, or other payments contrary to conscience. It then provides that there shall be no establishment of any one religious sect in this province in preference to another, and that no Protestant inhabitant of this colony shall be denied the employment or the enjoyment of any civil right merely on the account of his religious principles, and that all persons professing a belief and faith of any Protestant sect who shall demean themselves peacefully under the government as hereby established shall be capable of being elected into any office of profit or trust, of being a member of either branch of the legislature, and shall fully and freely enjoy every privilege and immunity enjoyed by others, their fellow subjects. Now, this would permit a test act, but it did not require one, okay? The original charter of the Providence from East Jersey had restricted membership in the assembly to Christians. The Duke of York was fervently Catholic. The proprietors of Perth Amboy in New Jersey were Scottish Catholic peers. The Providence of West Jersey had declared in 1681 that there should be no religious test for office. And the oath has also been imposed on Jefferson's letter Well, anyway, Martin Luther had a doctrine, noting that Martin Luther's doctrine of the two kingdoms marked the beginning of the modern conception of separation of church and state. Okay, the people of New York were predominantly Catholic. As a lot are today in New York, okay? Especially the Kinsey family, okay? But anyway, now, there should be no religious test to be in office. There was opponents to the support of any established church, even at the state level. In 1773, Isaac Backus, a prominent Baptist minister in New England, wrote against the state-sanctioned religion, saying, "Now who can hear Christ declare that his kingdom is not of this world, and yet believe that the blending of church and state together can be pleasing to him?" He also observed that when the church and state are separate, the effects are happy, and they do not interfere with each other. But when they have been confounded together, no tongue nor pen can fully describe the mischiefs that have ensued. Thomas Jefferson's influential Virginia statute for religious freedom was enacted in 1786. 5 years before the Bill of Rights. Most Anglican ministers and many Anglicans were loyalists. The Anglican establishment, where it had existed, largely ceased to function during the American Revolution, though the new states did not formally abolish and replace it until some years after the Revolution. Okay. So, there's a lot more here that it would take a whole lot to bring into discussion. But there was lots of states that tried to establish religious controls of the states, but eventually this was all abolished. Okay, because this is what they fled from in the old world. Okay, across the Great Pond. Okay, now our forefathers saw the separation of church and state as important, but its intent was not to remove Bible reading and prayer from schools, or colleges, or universities, okay? It was to say that no state could sanction any one religion, okay, over another, and that the people of different religions was free to worship without interference from government, federal or state, and eventually even local. Okay, all right. Now, we see in California today, California is now a socialist state. Okay, you can deny that if you want, but everything about California is socialist. Okay, and they are now trying to get it where Nancy Pelosi is trying to get it where preachers have to watch what they say behind the pulpit about government. Okay, that in itself is violation of the separation of church and state. It also violates freedom of religion and freedom of the press. And the right to peaceful assembly. Okay, so all these things are Nancy Pelosi is trying to violate all these things. Okay, and if these pastors do condemn the government in California, they're trying to get this passed. And then there could be consequences. There could be possible jail time, or the churches will lose their tax exemption, and the churches would have to pay taxes. Okay. Now, personally, I have no problem with churches paying taxes, because Jesus himself said, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." Okay. And based upon what Jesus said about that, I would have no objection to churches paying taxes. But it would be a big burden, especially on some large churches that have lots of property, and these television evangelists. There would be some big accountability there. Okay, all right. Now, the Bible, okay, it can be taught. The Bible here can be taught as history. It can be taught as poetry. It can be taught as moral law. Without getting into doctrine. Okay? It can be taught as literature in the sense, okay? The moral laws of this country were basically founded from Scripture, okay? Especially the Old Testament, which is actually the same thing as the Jewish Torah, okay, for the most part. And the 5 books of law established the concept of moral laws, okay, and a lot of the laws of our country are based upon the laws of the Old Testament, particularly the 10 Commandments of all the moral laws. So actually, if you go reading through these 5 books of laws, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, these are all books of the law. Okay? And there was some 667, somewhere around there, laws, besides the 10 Commandments that was written down. Okay. Now, capital punishment was one of these laws. Certain crimes demanded capital punishment. It was adultery, homosexuality, even things as simple as children disobeying their parents in certain cases. There was capital punishment. Okay. Example, there is a verse in the 5 Book of Laws that state that if you have an unruly child that refuses to listen to you, you could take that child to the local court, or the people that run the town, or whatever case, and tell the court, my child refuses to listen to me. And it was the law that if the council or the court ruled, that this child had indeed been disobedient, that he could be taken outside the city and stoned. He or she could be taken outside the city and stoned to death. Okay. I mean, the Old Testament has some really radical laws. Okay. Now, there's no recorded instances of where this happened. Okay. At least none in Scripture. Okay. And I don't think a parent that truly loved a child would do something like that except in very, very extreme circumstances. Like maybe the child tried to kill them or something, Anyway, there was laws on how to wash your hands. All sorts of things. Even violating, doing certain things on the Sabbath day has severe consequences. Okay. So anyway, the five books of law, especially the 10 Commandments, is what we base a lot of our country's laws on today. Okay. Now, so the Bible it's a book of law, moral law. It has historical content. It tells about great battles. It tells about changes of kingdoms. It tells about kings and the establishment of Rome. And it's also a book of poetry. And the book of Ecclesiastes and Proverbs is a book of common sense, which gives very good advice on how to live one's life. Okay. Then the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes talks about there's a time for this and time for that, time to live and time to die. That verse is read at many funerals. Okay, I have done many funerals using that verse in the past. So you have that, and then you have, Jonah in the well, the judgments of God that happen. It mentions other things in here that I'm not going to get into, such as a race of giants. I'm not going to go any further on that. But anyway, the Old Testament teaches a lot. And you can teach this without getting into doctrine. Okay? Now, the New Testament tells about important events that occurred in history. First one, and the most important, was the birth of Christ. And the ministry, the birth of Christ, the ministry of the apostles, the founding of the church. There's prophecy in the New Testament. There's also prophecy in the Old Testament. Anyway, the Bible can be taught in school without teaching doctrine. Okay? Because, many parents today, they don't want their children to be indoctrinated in religion in school, in the public schools. Okay? And Madeline O'Hare, back in the 1960s, or late 50s, somewhere around there, got prayer and Bible reading out of the schools. Now, I don't need to say this, because I think most of us know it, that once this happened, the moral decay of this country started. And we have seen the result of it today. Morals are not being taught in the schools. Jesus taught love for one another. Love your enemies, okay? That's basic concepts of life. And you can teach these things without getting into doctrine. Right? There's nothing wrong with praying. Praying should, bowing your head, and praying should not be mandatory. And, it's something that if you do, you can do if you want to, but you should respect the rights of others to do it. I mean, if you just want to bow your head and just bow your head and don't pray, so don't say nothing, and let the other members of your class pray. Okay. Now, when I was in elementary school in the 60s, we were not taught doctrine in school. Why? We'd have 1 or 2 verses a day, and you'd get maybe extra credit for doing memory verses. Okay. Because it says, hide the word of God in your heart that you might not sin against God. And, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, all right. So, doctrine should be taught in the church. And the doctrine should be taught at home. It is not the place of public schools to teach doctrine. Now, a Christian school is different. Okay? Doctrine is taught in Christian schools. I was a teacher's aide in one for a couple of years. Okay? So, I know. Okay? I've been an educator in the past, believe it or not. I would love to teach American history. Because I would give it right, like it's supposed to be taught. Right? Now, the issue. Anyway, the issue is, it was on Facebook today that about in God we trust thing, posters being made and put up in the schools, things like that. I said, well, it's not up to the schools. It's not up to the taxpayers' money to pay for those posters. the churches should sponsor that idea. Okay? Of course, taxpayer money should not be spent on religion in the schools. That applies to any religion. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, whatever. Okay? Now the issue with In God We Trust. Now in God We Trust has been the motto of our country for 230-something years, I think. And there is nothing wrong with having the motto, In God We Trust. Okay. Now, there's the concept that verse is replying to the God of Christianity. Okay. And its original intent was. Okay. But there are those that believe in no God, or they believe in different gods. You got Buddhism, Hinduism, Allah, and Islam, Baal, Satan worship's becoming a big thing now. So the term in general, God, could mean anything, or any deity. Now, when Paul was in the city of Athens, they had hundreds of gods, idols to hundreds of gods in that city. Not just the Greek gods, but other gods. Okay. So the words "In God We Trust" is a general, should be considered today just to be a general statement. In other words, in whatever God that you trust, okay, there's nothing wrong with having that model on paper. I mean, on the walls of the schools, engraved in our buildings. And just like on the movie Battleship, one thing that surprised me was it said at the tracking station on the ship it says, "In God we trust. Others we track." Okay, all right. So anyway, that was pretty cool. That movie. But anyway, and you'll see signs in restaurants that say, "In God we trust, cash only," or whatever. Things like that. But anyway, so in America you have the right to not believe in God or to believe in God, regardless of what God that is. Now another aspect of the Church and State Clause is that the Constitution speaks against having a theocracy. Okay. The United States is not a democracy. It is a constitutional republic. Democracy is a generic term for a free ruling country. Okay, right? The UK was a democracy, but it's about to change. And a lot of the countries in Europe will eventually become theocracies. Now, a theocracy is the definition of theocracy is a government that is ruled based upon the laws of a God. And this God, the best example of that today would be Islam. Okay. Islamic countries are ruled by the words of the Quran, okay, and the Hadith. Those rules are absolute. The laws are absolute. Okay. The interpretation of the laws are absolute. And only the words of Allah, as Muhammad and Abu saw it, is considered the law of the land. Okay? So, Islam is not just a religion. In Islamic countries, it is a form of government. A government, absolute power. Okay, it has its own law structure based upon the Quran and the things in the Hadith, and the Sunni and the Shiite teachings. Depending upon what type of Muslim you are. It has its own judicial system. It has its own legislative branches, which enforce the Quran and the Sunnis and Shiite law, depending on what type of Muslim you are. It has its own banking system. It has its own welfare system. It has its own policing and military, which is usually a combination of both. Because it is a dictatorship. In Islamic countries, you have a dictatorship. Okay. So the greatest example today of a theocracy would be an Islamic country. Okay. Now there are countries like Russia, where like Stalin, when he was in power, his words was absolute. If you criticized him, you was killed. You was put to death. Millions were killed. Same thing with in China. Laws were absolute. Just in North Korea today, Kim Jong-un, whatever his name is over there, the law's absolute. You either obey the laws over in North Korea or they put you to death. Okay? Even trying to leave the country, you'd be shot. Okay. Then you have situations like in Venezuela. I'm not sure I pronounced that right. Where at one time it was a democracy. And things changed within days. And now in that country, we used to be one of the richest countries in the world, is now considered a third world country. And it's under a dictatorship. So anybody under the United States Constitution, theocracy is illegal. Because of the separation of the church and state clause. Now, I don't know if you know anything about the Mormon church history. I know a little bit. It was the original intent of Joseph Smith and his followers. I can't think of the other guy's name. Anyway, the two main leaders in Mormonism, that when they got to Utah, the promised land, that they would establish a utopia there, with laws based upon Mormonism, Mormon-type government. And that got them into trouble with the rest of the United States, especially the teachings of polygamy. Brigham Young and Joseph Smith. Okay, I got that right now. Anyway, the teachings of those two guys, that's what Mormonism was based upon. Their intent was to establish the Promised Land, and the Promised Land was Utah. And they established the first so-called godly city in Salt Lake City. And there began to be conflicts. And plus, the Mormons were greatly prosecuted on the way west. There was even a massacre. I'm not sure what state it was in, but it was Mormon against Mormon. People, and they killed each other, right, over different issues. So much for the Mormon utopia, okay? But the United States government did not prohibit them from practicing their religion. Okay? They could still practice their faith, but they could not use that faith to be a form of government. That's one of the great things about the church and state separation clause. We see the importance of the separation of church and state, but it was not the intent of our forefathers to not give our youth some form of Bible, the concepts of morality, the concepts of law, the concepts concept of war. There's a lot of wars in the Bible. And as I said before, you can teach Bible doctrine. I mean, you can teach the Bible without doctrine. Okay? Teaching your students doctrine. Okay? Doctrine should be taught in the church, and it should be taught at home. Okay? It is not the role of the public schools to teach doctrine. But if it's looked at as a book of history, a book of poetry, a book of law, a book of love. When Jesus said, "Love your enemies," that is an important moral concept. So I can see the idea, the parents' concept of not being indoctrinated in the Bible, because there are so many different faiths. See, doctrine is the deep teachings of the Word of God, not general teachings. Okay, it is the deep teachings of the Word of God. And every church should have a doctrine. It should have, it should have a belief. And members of that church should be taught that belief. But they should not teach it in schools, public schools. I mean, if you want your children to have a biblical education, put them in a Christian school. But when you take morality out of context, such as the basic 10 Commandments, which is not really taught a lot in schools. The talk for respect of authority, respect of your parents. This, ever since they took prayer and Bible reading out of school, morality has went to the dogs. So, if you're a teacher, if it is your job to teach children, morality is an important part of their teaching. Okay. The 10 Commandments is a guideline, okay, for the law. It is the 10 Commandments is the foundation for the law of many different religions, including Islam, even though they won't admit it. Okay, a lot of Islamic law comes from the Torah. Okay, and a lot of the other religions base their concept on the 10 Commandments. A lot of countries have based their concepts on the 10 Commandments. So anyway, I'm about running out of time here. Anyway, I just wanted to say, in closing, the clause of the church and state and religion will always be an issue, okay? Always. And mean, it has been ever since Madeline O'Hare, which, by the way, she did convert to Christianity before she died. And her son has been trying to reverse what she did. And I don't know how much progress he's reached on that, but there's no reason why public schools shouldn't have at least a prayer and a few Bible verses read every day. But you public teachers out there, it is not your role to teach doctrine. Okay? Of any faith. When schools start sending children on a field trip to mosque, that is a violation of the church and state laws. Because it is not the role of the public schools to teach doctrine of religion. Okay. Anyway, that's all I got to say on that today. Anyway, I do got to say that when I was in high school, I belonged to an organization called The Club, THEE, and on our campus, which was a public high school, we pretty much had religious freedom there. Okay, you know how schools have clubs. Well, we had The Club, and we would meet and we would talk Bible. Okay. Without sanction of the school. We was treated just like, if it was the FFA or the National Honor Society, any other group in schools. I mean, we had a pretty good sized group of Christians that we'd meet once or twice a month, I think, in one of the classrooms, and we pretty well had pretty much religious freedom in school. But it was not mandated. It was not mandated that you go to that club. It was voluntary. You had your own choice. Okay. So there are parents out there that don't want the Bible taught to their kids. The Bible taught to their kids. Doctrine, Bible doctrine should not be taught to kids in public schools. Okay, but the basic history, the literature, the Bible is literature also. It's not just the Word of God, it's also literature and its history. So, anyway, think about that. I mean, I would have no problem, even though I'm a preacher, I would have no problem teaching in a public school this work as literature. and it's the moral concepts that are in here. Okay, and I can do that without getting into doctrine. Anyway, that's all I have to say today. Anyway, God bless you. It is January the 11th, 2020, as we're beginning a new year. It's been raining like crazy the past couple of days. It's been a little wet. Anyway, God bless. Now, just consider the history I gave you today. There's a lot that I missed. But as a United States citizen, you have the right to attend church or not to attend church. And it's no state, no federal government under the United States Constitution has a right to tell you how to worship. It does not have the right to tell preachers what they can preach or what they can't preach. It does not have the right to say that you cannot preach against government. Is what Nancy Pelosi and them was trying to do in California. There they want the preachers to tune in their messages to the state and get the approval to do the messages. Okay? That's not the intent of the United States Constitution. The Democratic Party is socialist. It was one of the greatest fears of J.F. Kennedy. And the one that they think killed Kennedy did not kill Kennedy. He knew things, and he was killed for it. Okay. And a lot of these things involve communist infiltration into the Democratic Party. Okay. Years ago, when I worked in the hospital, this was back in the 70s, late 70s. I took care of a former Secret Service agent that was assigned to President Kennedy. And he told me a lot of things about Kennedy knew that he would be assassinated. He didn't know when and where. And he had plans to switch parties. But before he could do any of this, he was assassinated. It was, and his assassination was an inside job. Okay. But I think most of America knows that. Okay. I was like 7 or 8 when he got assassinated. So, I can remember being upset because they showed his funeral on a Saturday, and I messed up my cartoons. But anyway, that's one thing I remember about him, his funeral. Okay, but anyway, But anyway, JFK saw into the future, and he saw things that we are seeing today happening in our country. That's all I can say on that. Okay. For the killing of Robert Kennedy and anyway, all the Kennedys that was assassinated, it was planned. It just didn't happen. Okay, it was planned. Okay. So anyway, we're seeing a great downfall in our country today. It's slipping, and it's slipping fast. Churches are becoming apostate. In so many ways today. I'm not going to get into that either. I'm just saying that churches are becoming apostate. Major denominations. I'm sorry to say, to me, I'm an independent Baptist, even though I do have a history with the American Baptist Association and with the Baptist Missionary Association of America. I've had association with them. So over the years, I have also preached in non-denominational churches, and I have preached in Pentecostal churches. So but my basic foundation is Baptist. Okay. Well, anyway, I just want to say, God bless you all. Martin Luther King Day is coming up soon on this 20th of this month. He was a great man. I greatly admired him. He tried to achieve strength without violence, and an equality without violence. And it's just so horrible that violence took him out, because that's not what he wanted. So he's one of the great men in American history. And I think he was a Baptist preacher too. So, maybe the AME church, maybe perhaps. But anyway, he was a preacher too. So, proclaim liberty throughout the land. Okay, that's what I've always said. Proclaim liberty throughout. And we have issues going on in Virginia today involving the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment protects all the other ones, okay? Especially the First. Okay? I believe civil war is coming to America eventually, and I think it's going to start in Virginia. And it's going to be over guns. So I think Virginia's going to be like the testing grounds for gun rights in this country. And they're trying to pass some type of new law here in Indiana about long guns. They're raising the age limit where you can buy a long gun. So I don't know. All right, my battery is about to go down. So anyway, have a good day. I will try to broadcast this later on once my battery gets charged. All right. Anyway, good night.